Hi folks, this is Guillotine again. As I've likely established by now, I'm a pretty avid game collector. So long as I can justify a reason for it, I'll usually go after anything. However, through my collecting and corresponding research, I've occasionally come across a title that I'll find little, if any, reason to collect. Now, I've gone at length in the past discussing how I believe that video games are an art form and have a right to exist. However, I will draw lines at certain boundaries, and I draw a line at one very particular title. A title that I never have and never will own. A title that I would advise anyone, if they have a copy, to destroy it because of the legal ramifications that you could potentially be exposed to. Don't sell it, don't store it, don't keep it on display somewhere, and don't give it to some other individual that may not know what it is. I speak with no hyperbole that if someone was petty enough and they knew that you had this title, they could potentially see you arrested. If someone behind the legal system as well were to discover that you had this and wanted to pursue this to a worst case scenario, your life could be turned into a living hell. Now, I feel I should warn those of more sensitive constitution. I'm going to be discussing a rather uncomfortable topic today. I'm going to be talking about depictions of minors in a sexual or pornographic sense. Now, to ensure that there's no confusion, I think child pornographers and those that consume their toxic waste are the absolute lowest rung of scum in society and should be dealt with in a manner that I can't describe here, lest I be kicked off of YouTube. Lastly, a disclaimer before I go any further. I am not a legal professional. This should not be considered legal advice. While I did conduct research in preparation for this video, and while my professional work and education are tangential to the legal profession, I'm making judgments and going off of an assessment I made based on the information that I was able to find and research. Anyone who wants to know more about this topic and is curious about the implications of this title should look into the relevant jurisdictions and become familiar with their laws. However, even with that caveat, from what I was able to determine, the status of owning this title falls into the designation of illegal. That title being The Guy Game. Given the subject matter of this title in question, I have absolutely zero reservations saying again that I never have, do not currently, and never will own this game. Everything that is being presented here is research based off of trailers, footage obtained off of other reviews, news articles, court documents, and written laws. At face value, The Guy Game seems pretty innocuous. A rather shallow and seemingly excusable title where you are presented with assorted trivia questions or puzzles and mini-games. Upon performing well, the player is then treated to brief images of videos of young women exposing their breasts. But that reward system is where issues come to light. In 2005, a lawsuit was filed against the developers of The Guy Game in Top Heavy Studios vs. Doe. The plaintiff, listed as Jane Doe, stated in the lawsuit that she was 17 at the time. You see, the developers decided that the best place to go and film the footage was at one of the local spring break events that young teenagers flocked to. The female in question misidentified herself and said at the time that she was 18, but when she learned what the video was being used for, came forward. In the following lawsuit, the female successfully sued to stop distribution of the game. The game was ordered to have production ceased and distribution stopped. However, at the time, thousands of copies for PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox had already made their way into the wild. But let's reverse course slightly and focus in on one detail. The girl was 17 at the time. It can vary from state to state, but for most places the age of majority is 18. However, to make things much simpler, I'm going to be focusing on United States federal jurisdiction. With that in mind, that makes her appearance in this video game factually the depiction of a minor. In previous instances where I was researching, I was attempting to find definitions regarding underage pornography, and federal laws give some clarity to the matter that would initially make you think The Guy Game may not necessarily be classified as such, since it seems to focus explicitly on the performance of sexual acts. This last time around, though, I encountered something called the DOST test. For those that are unaware, the DOST test is a set of 6 questions to establish the criteria under which something can be classified as underage pornography, and this test is what would ultimately hinge the determination on whether or not you could be going to jail for owning this title. Let's look at and paraphrase the individual components of the test. 1. Does it focus on the genital or pubic area? 2. Is the subject in a sexual pose? 3. Is the pose unnatural, or are they clothed inappropriately regarding their age? 4. Is the individual clothed, partially clothed, or nude? 5. Does the subject look like they want to engage in a sexual activity? And 6, is the depiction trying to elicit a sexual response? Again, these are the 6 criteria by which media is judged as to whether or not it qualifies as pornographic material when depicting an underage individual. Now, on my personal judgment, I can see at least 2 criteria by which you can definitively say yes to, with another 2 criteria being open to discussion and arguments based off the snippets of material I've seen off of other various YouTube videos covering the game, or even simply the box art and text blurbs. It is worth noting that something does not need to meet every criteria of the DOST test to be considered. Similarly to a judicial copyright review, while several areas of review are considered, not all of them need to be confirmed to meet all the necessary standards as to whether it violates the law or not. Let's recap. We have a game that, without question, depicts a minor exposing their breasts to a camera. A game that made its primary selling point on the foundation of horny men wanting to see nude women. And we have a series of tests that could have the majority of its criteria determine that the game is underage pornography. Is anyone else already uncomfortable? Now let's dial it back just a little bit. Anyone who has any degree of familiarity with the criminal justice system knows that there are many moving pieces and it is incredibly difficult to navigate. If it wasn't, then we wouldn't have lawyers and other legal professionals whose sole job is to navigate the more complicated aspects of these procedures. That being said, I have few reservations in saying that there is a potential outcome where a person can quite literally be arrested and go to prison just for owning a copy of the Guy game. It's just not the most likely outcome. Let's go over the most basic summary of the procedures that would be necessary for that to happen. First, you would have to own a copy of the Guy game. Second, there would have to be a prosecuting attorney, or DA, that was aware of your ownership of this title, and they would want to have to go after you, and they would also have to be aware of the controversy surrounding this title, and already we are in the territory of unlikely to happen. Now let's say we've made it to the trial. At some point, we would definitely have to have a hearing with the DOS test standards being put under scrutiny. While I have determined that the standards being required would likely meet the necessary requirements to label it as underage pornography, a judge or a jury might come to a different conclusion. It would also have to be proven at some point which female in question is the one behind the controversy, and that could prove difficult and time-consuming considering the suit was filed purposely with the female remaining anonymous. Now, as far as the actual charges being presented, it would in all likelihood be possession of underage pornography charges. And possession charges, unlike other aspects of the legal system, are fairly black and white. A yes or no question, in fact. All that needs to be asked is, did you have this on your person or ownership in some aspect? No other consideration is necessary. You had it on you, and now you're screwed for it. Now finally, let's assume that everything has gone along the path of the worst case scenario for whoever owned a copy of the Guy game. The individual is found guilty and makes it all the way to sentencing. According to federal guidelines, there is no minimum mandatory sentence for a singular instance of possession. Sentencing is also one of the most subjective fields when it comes to the background of the individual or other mitigating circumstances. If it's just a random guy who had no idea what he owned, has done absolutely nothing wrong otherwise, and is an upstanding citizen, it could simply be a matter of a small fine and surrendering the copy. However, if this individual also happened to have other examples of possession, was on the hook for something much more significant, or even was just a massive idiot and dickhead to the judge throughout the entirety of proceedings, the maximum sentence, according to federal guidelines, is 10 years in prison. Now bear in mind, that is all along the worst case scenario. To reiterate, you absolutely could go to jail and have something like this happen for owning a copy. But will you? Highly unlikely. But it's worth noting that if you're going to live your life while attempting to stay out of trouble as much as humanly possible, then it is sound advice to leave no openings to get into trouble. And let's backtrack to one aspect I touched at the very start of the video. Freedom of expression. While it is not explicitly spelled out in the First Amendment, the other considerations and stipulations of the First Amendment have led to the interpretation that expression is defended under the First Amendment. But to preempt some idiot out there who would have the gall to try and defend underage pornography, the Supreme Court has explicitly stated that it does not fall under First Amendment protections. So, let's dissect one final avenue, and discuss this game as a collector's piece. The only conceivable avenue I can think of is that this game has an interesting story behind it. But is that story really worth all the trouble that something like this could get you into? Even being in a situation where you have to defend yourself from a possession of underage pornography charge is going to be an unpleasant experience, because you're going to have to deal with factors such as legal expenses, which can get exorbitant very quickly, potential blows to your social and professional life, and for what? A game that can quite easily be replaced by any number of cheap titles on Steam that can be acquired for less than $5 and are not in anywhere near as prickly a legal spot. And if someone was thinking of selling this title to recoup a potential loss after you made the decision to purchase this in the past, heed my advice. Don't. Because while possession of underage pornography is already an uncomfortable and legally dangerous place to be in, imagine getting charged with selling or trafficking this stuff. And make no mistake, that's exactly what selling this would be considered if all the standards I've gone through before are indeed correct. But that leads to one other uncomfortable and massive implication. I mentioned before that this game is a bit of a collector's piece. That implies that its purchase and sale take place regularly. You can still acquire this title on eBay. These listings as of October 2021 are still active. If everything I've determined so far is accurate, this means eBay and many other independent retail sites are potentially complicit in the trafficking of underage pornography. And let's not forget, ignorance of the law is not an excuse for its violation. This is an uncomfortable realization indeed. If you stuck around this far into the video and you know someone with a copy of this game, do them a favor. Send them to this video. Calmly express that it would be in their best interest to destroy their copy. And don't get me wrong, a lot of this is speculation and conjecture off of research that I've conducted that would have to be established in a court precedent. But let's look at this honestly. Do you want to see yourself or a friend be made that example? Upon publication of this video, I'll be sending an email to eBay asking for official statements about their stance on this potential revelation. If they respond in a meaningful way, I'll be sure to post it here. But until then, I want to hear back from you. Is there something I forgot legally, or am I over or underthinking some element of this? Leave a comment down below so we can keep the discussion going. Thanks for watching, and keep your head on your shoulders.